You're listening to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. Hello, my friend, and welcome to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. I'm Brad Hoefs, your host. Our purpose here on Fresh Hope for Mental Health is to empower you to live a faith-filled, rich, and full life in spite of having a mental health diagnosis. We're so glad that you're with us today, my friend. And today, once again in the studio, I have a good friend. His name is Jason Peterson. You can check him out on Facebook. He's also got a website, jasonpeterson.com. And we're going to talk about overcoming internal stigma. And that'll be the basis of our subject today. Well, anyway, glad to have you. In our earlier podcast, we talked about the fact that you shared your story online through video and the breakthrough, really, of finding that there were friends that you knew in person that were thankful that you were sharing your story, et cetera, et cetera. Talk to me a little bit about stigma. Let's go a little deeper into it. And tell me how you personally experienced it, either by somebody treating you differently, or how did you internalize it yourself?
Well, I would say that when I first was diagnosed, and again, with all due respect to my family, which is very supportive now, they were really uncomfortable and didn't really know what to make of that. Mm-hmm. Some of the associations they had was very negative. Mm-hmm. So there was a, I don't know what to do with this, maybe sort of feeling at that moment. So I think that was the first part where I didn't really know how to answer those individuals or people that had it, that it was like, it's okay, man, it's all good, don't worry about it.
So you weren't hearing that from anybody?
No.
There was nobody out there that you were finding or...
And I didn't know anybody that had it or had any issues like this. I mean, nobody talked about it.
Did you find any encouragement from your medical provider, the mental health provider, from your doctor or anything? Or how did your doctor handle it? Because some doctors will say, you're going to have to deal with this the rest of your life. This is going to be difficult. And you kind of end up saying, this is as good as it's going to get.
I think the part where I had the most strong reaction, I had a counselor before that immediately kind of flippantly said I was bipolar, and I had the most negative association with that word and that term. Mm-hmm. And I came unglued. I mean, I remember sobbing in my car like, this can't be possible. I can't have something like that. The best source of sanctuary I experienced, and again, my parents started to they just didn't understand it. Mm-hmm. I don't want to,
right. They probably got educated.
Yeah, they got educated over time. Mm-hmm. But my counselor that I had after that was a Christian faith-based counselor who's still my counselor to this day. She was very compassionate, and she helped me in the process of finding a psychiatrist. And that's something I've shared on my blog, is that a lot of times the counselor can help plug you into that arena. And it was from there that I was able to find one that was, I think, more helpful. But I definitely felt like such an oddball. At the time, I'd sold my business. I remember working for a couple years, and at that point, my medication was completely out of whack, and I felt about as bizarre. I had to quit a job because I was just so mentally like mushy that I was not able to do it, and it was sort of a higher level, kind of more stressful job in terms of management. Mm-hmm. I did tell him. So my first job, I did not tell anybody. Mm-hmm. And I ended up getting fired, which was really, really awful. But then the next time, when I went through the job and I could see things weren't jiving, I was open about it. And I told him, what I was struggling with. How did
the person respond to you?
Well, they were very supportive. I mean, they really I didn't know what was going to happen. Mm-hmm. It happened to be that one of the owners, he had experience in his family with someone that had mental.
So the Lord really gave you grace there, huh?
Big time. That was a breath of fresh air that at least started to make me feel like, okay, there are safe ways that I can talk about this, and I need to not hold this so close to the vest. So that was the first point of that. But in terms of the stigma, oh my gosh, I was not comfortable telling anybody. I wanted to hide this. I wanted to make sure that no one knew. I needed to try and make it so that it didn't exist in the sense that in more of a denial, where I just did not want to accept that this was a part of me. And during this process, I ended up getting a couple more disorder diagnoses, and I'm just. I'm like,
and
oh my
it's
gosh,
heaping on.
it's just it's piling on one after the other, So I mean, there's that point of untruth where I'm like, gosh, I'm worthless. I mean, I've just got so many issues. I can't even put things together.
Yeah, and my experience was about that time I started going to some mental health support group meetings thinking, okay, this is going to help. And what I found were people who were feeling as bad, if not worse, and talking about disability and all of these things. And I thought, oh my gosh, I don't want to go here. I can't do this. This
Exactly.
can't be me.
Sure.
Because there is that hopelessness that can take over, that when you only experience the medical model of things and, the medical side of it, and it's imperative, we need that side of it.
Yep.
But they don't really help us learn how to live and say, hey, I can have a great life in spite of this.
No, they
and
don't.
Instead, you find people that have just become chronically ill. And I think that part of that stigma that keeps it inside of us and not talking about it can in fact make us sicker.
Yes, correct. I mean, I the thing I can relate to people where, sort of the church or the faith-based part not being helpful is I went to a past church I was belonging to and met with the pastor, and it was a horrible experience.
Oh.
And just I remember walking out of there like, I don't even know what to do. Like, I felt like that moment in time where God had abandoned me, which again, it was the church, not God.
Right. God had not.
Yeah, God didn't do it, but so I can empathize if someone's gone to been at a church where they have not been supportive of this or helpful. And actually, we made a change. We made a change because of this. Because
Good for you.
It was clear that I was not as welcome there as I was hoping I would be.
Well, and that's the thing. When you run into stigma at places that are supposed to be supportive, the church should, as the body of Christ, they need to be supportive. And ignorance, lack of information, theology that doesn't allow for mental illness,
right?
Those kinds of things are signs that it's not a safe place for somebody who has a brain that doesn't work properly all the time.
Sure.
And you got to get out of that environment because it's stigma-based. And I really believe that stigma keeps people sick. It actually makes people sicker. And so if you don't talk about it and you just hold it all in and you try to manage it yourself, you never speak of it, things like that. Or if you have a family that just refuses to come to terms with it, those are all dangerous things that can cause you to just go spiraling down pretty fast.
Absolutely. No, I think the journey uphill, and I say this, on my blog too, is that, hey, it's hard uphill. It's okay. I mean, you kind of have to expect a road. You gotta.
There are times you feel like you're pushing an elephant up the hill, and it plops its rear end, and you get smashed and down on you.
And you have to, as much as you can, which is hard. We just talked about like knowing what God was doing in hindsight, but don't know what He's doing in the middle of the experience. Right. That God was working with me, and part of it is that I had to trust Him, and I had to allow Him to be in my heart and start fighting that bitterness and start to heal some of that stigma and some of that embarrassment. So that started to happen where I was becoming more comfortable. I remember talking a lot with my parents and talking with my sister and, just getting comfortable in my skin, like discussing that this is what I have and this is what I struggle with. And yes, I take medication and these are things I have to manage. And so that was a progression. So even when I was going
I'm sure that finding out more and more information, doing some homework in regards to it all helped you in feeling comfortable and talking about it.
Absolutely.
As well as time.
Yes. I mean, my counselor was amazing. She saved me 100 times and then some because of her faith-based position. She was able to inject truth in me perhaps when I wasn't necessarily when I was not connected in a church.
Yeah.
And as a result, got us into a scenario where I had a psychiatrist in a group that they actually did medical testing on the way my blood chemistry actually like absorbed the medication.
Wow.
And so it helped give us a roadmap of what medication probably would be good to start with. They re-diagnosed me. I took all the tests again. So we kind of said ground zero. We're like, you know what? My last psychiatrist, it wasn't working. I spent about 3 years. Let's just stop. Let's reset. She helped me find these guys. And between her treatment, which is more of the how you're going to live, and them in terms of the clinical side, and again, what was so wonderful about her and what is she's faith-based. So we had conversations, and she was the one that kind of really got me into a couple verses of 3 verses and started to, push the domino, down as far as me reading more, in Scripture.
Yeah.
So I think that maybe that's the thing, that by having my support group was my wife, my family, and my counselor.
Sure.
And I mean, for those that don't have a counselor that are fighting this, I would strongly recommend having that, because that can be a source of conversation that you can have about how to live with it, where your psychiatrist, like you said, is not going to do that.
Well, and if you've seen the same therapist over and over and over for years and years and years, and you don't feel like you've gone up that hill and have learned and are growing and changing and progressing to live more well, or, live well, I would say you need a different therapist.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, to me, you have to find somebody that, truly gets you, right? There's a lot of layers to Jay, and she was able to understand me and peel back and have tremendous insight. So every time I'd walk out of there was always something that she was able to glean that I couldn't see myself. And maybe that was my criteria was with the bad counselors I had, is they were just spitting back stuff I said. She, on the other hand, would listen and then be able to say, challenging or just saying, now here's some things I'm hearing that's going on that I'm not sure you're realizing or recognizing that's happening. Or Jay, I remember the greatest one that she told me. I've told this story many times. When my wife and I were working through the best way to manage my illness in our marriage, she turned to me or to both of us. She said, "Look, here's the deal. Jay, your illness is an inconvenience. Get over it. It's the way it is. It's going to be that way like any other illness. It's going to inconvenience in a relationship. So don't quit feeling bad about that. That's okay." And that was like shook me. And I'm like, oh, okay. Because I felt bad about it. I felt like I was a burden to my wife, not because she had said anything. It's just I felt so bad that she had to be married to someone that had all this stuff.
Now say that again. Your illness or your disorder is an inconvenience?
Yes. I felt like I was a massive inconvenience to my wife.
And she told you?
And my counselor said, "Jay, yes, your illness is an inconvenience. Get over it. If you had any other illness, it would be an inconvenience too. This is just part of your story, and this is what you guys have in your marriage, and you have to deal with it. That's what it is. It is what it is. Stop like obsessing about feeling bad about it, because it isn't going to do anything."
Or saying, this isn't fair, this isn't fair. I think sometimes we can do that too.
Exactly. And she did it in a loving way, but just like she'd known me long enough that she just kind of interrupted that the what I was thinking in my frame of mind or whatever, that I was a burden on my wife.
Well,
I was not helpful.
If you get stuck there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was total untruthful crap.
Yeah.
And by interrupting that pattern, that changed me and Holly for a long, for the better and ongoing, because we knew that just, it is part of it. And I stopped feeling so bad, and she kind of came to grips at like, what, we're not mad at God, we're not, I feel bad like because I can't help Jay when he's in a bad situation, and all that stuff that you have with some of the loved ones around you, where they're confused because they don't know what to do. They want to help you, but they don't know how to help you. So I think the counselor thing, I can't say that enough. By having a good counselor, it helped me when I was not making progress, and it encouraged me and kept me on the right path when I was making progress. and she stuck with me, and I don't know. I'm so indebted to her, because that is what gave me the endurance, both the emotional endurance and the spiritual endurance, from an encouragement perspective, to feel like I could be healthy and well for my family.
Yeah.
And that was all roads led to my family. I have 2 kids. They're 3 and 4 years old. I have a wife who I love more than anything on the planet. I did not want my illness to be something that was an obstruction in the way our family operated. I felt so bad.
Part of that is you could have had a different problem.
Exactly.
It could have been workaholism. It could have been it could have been an addiction. It could have been, there's just so many roadblocks.
Absolutely.
Everybody's got roadblocks. I think one of the lies that we believe that the enemy tells us is that somehow what you've got could stop everything from being good in your life.
Absolutely. It's fatalistic. It's the worst of the worst. I mean, I remember like my wife telling me probably 6 months ago, she said, Jay, through prayerful sort of reflection with God, I've realized that your illness has made me a better person. And I went, what? Like I literally fell out of my chair, because I'm like, how is that even possible? She says, and my wife, she's a strong, like I lean on her. She's a strong woman, and she's very, very loving and just able to endure tough stuff. And she says, you taught me so much about empathy and compassion, because when I would be in this place, it was a weakness that was not associated with me being a man. It was just, I was in a bad place. And like that, needing that moment where you extend a hand. Like, actually, Mary Beth used to say this, where she'd say, you have to look at Jay when he is really struggling, like he's a 7-year-old boy, and he just needs you to say, are you okay? That was it. She said, when he's at his worst, you can't look at him like he's some weak-minded, 37-year-old man. He's a guy that's struggling, and he just needs your support. And she always had that, but it was hard to I totally get this, for someone that doesn't have this, and to look at us and to try to make sense is hard. It's difficult.
Yeah. My wife has many times said we need to be glad we can't make sense out of this.
That's right.
Because that means they've not struggled, and thank the Lord you don't have that particular thing.
No. And so what was so cool that happened in terms of this whole breaking stigma conversation is that as we were breaking down these barriers, we ultimately were able to come together as a couple and just strengthen our marriage as a whole.
Well, and so what you're really saying in regards to stigma is that you really went through a process of not wanting anyone to know, to feeling more comfortable about it in your own skin and able to talk to family about it. And then you made this big leap at some point where you leapt by starting a video blog and telling the whole world.
Correct.
So what now have you experienced? Did that free you up? Did that make you even feel more, if you will, like you can make huge contributions to other people's lives? Or, what happened internally with you at that point?
Well, I think that the moment that I started to believe that I internally, because of the own untruth that was cycling in my head, that, I am okay in my family, and I'm a great father, and I'm a great husband, and anything that says otherwise is a bunch of hooey. It's a bunch of crud. So when I started to subscribe to those truths, those eternal truths, is when, for me, then the embarrassment and the stigma started to break away.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
And then you get to the point where you don't care if somebody else has got to hang up with it. It's their issue.
No, and then really for me, it was just, okay, I just want to find the balance. I'm just working on my medication and working on this. I work with my counselor. And then that's when, finally things kind of got over the hump with some of the medication adjustments with my depression. And that's when I'm like, mentally, I was already there in terms of spiritually, I was okay. Now I could physiologically able to operate now in a more balanced perspective. And that's when God kicked me and said, okay,
now
you're good time. Now I've been preparing you. Okay, you've been going through all of this. And again, I look at this now and I know that. is that I saw all this stuff. And all this stuff I experienced that was so difficult is what is allowing me to relate and empathize with the people that I'm serving.
And it doesn't mean that it will always be, you'll always be at this spot.
No.
You will have struggles, but speaking about God's truth, Jesus said, in this world, you will have trouble.
Exactly. And that's I've come to grips with, like, just now being open about it, is it's okay. So if you have a struggle or you're having a bad day, like, there's good dialogue. We have tools now that we use to be able to talk about this. We know triggers. We've learned. We've developed a pattern in our family and just the way things operate where it's okay. I can talk openly and I can tell, Holly, if things are happening, ahead of it, I'm like, I'm feeling funky, something, so you know. And she's like, hey, you want to pray? You want to, it's like, that when you do that, then you are able to manage and try to fight some of those things before they get out of control.
I want to encourage those of you who are listening to this to really consider thinking about how you stigmatize yourself, or the internal stigma that you have about your own disorder. There's no doubt there's stigma out there in the real world. And there are people who will look at you and think something's bad or terrible or whatever. I want you to just think about you, and then where it might be safe to tell your story, where it might be safe for you to start talking about this, and break down your own internal stigma. The more you do that, the healthier you'll become, I believe. Because that internal stigma is kind of like a cancerous tumor inside of you. And you let that grow, and that in and of itself can keep you sick. Not talking about it, pretending like you don't have it, or wishing you didn't have it, getting stuck believing that this is fatal, that's all stigma kind of talking. Those are all lies from the pits of hell. And the more you're able to release that truth within yourself, the healthier you become, the more you'll speak it out. And I think Jay's giving us a perfect example of what happens when you open up and you tell the world.
It's liberating. I just can't emphasize that enough. When you're able to build up that spiritual courage to do that, you no longer, you feel free, and you're like, hey, I got issues. That's okay. You know what? There's no shame in that, because we all got issues. We're all messy. We said that earlier. Messy people. We're all messy people.
And if you think you don't have any issues, let me stay with you for about 24 hours and I'll point them out, or I will trigger every issue you have. I kind of have a gift that way. I want to really thank you for being here today, because if people are interested in watching your blogs and listening to your blogs, you go to Jason Peterson, and Peterson spelled with an S-E-N.
That's correct. JasonPeterson.com. Correct. Yeah. And it's got the links to, there's feeds of YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook. A lot of the action's going on Facebook, but you can click to either one of them to go, and there's probably 20 or so videos on YouTube as well. Yep.
I'd encourage you to do that today. Listen, friend, if you're dealing with internal stigma, start working at chipping that away. It's kind of... for those of us who have broken through that, we don't want to go back to the bondage. It's like being held slave to your disorder. And there's a freedom there that you can experience that will exponentially help me out here, exponentially
yes.
Bring about more healing for you.
Yep.
So, all right. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Brad.
Well, my friend, we want to thank you for listening to this edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health. We hope it's been helpful to you. We'd really like to hear from you. Email us your comments, questions, or insights to podcast@freshhopeformentalhealth.com. And we'll answer your questions or share your comments and insights with our listeners. You can also leave a voicemail on our podcast website at www.freshhopeformentalhealth.com. We'd like to connect with you on Facebook or Twitter. You can find us. You can find that by looking at our information on the website also. We have a YouTube channel with insightful videos, and you'll find those links and other things on our website at freshhopeformentalhealth.com. Would you mind doing me a favor? If you're listening and receiving our podcast through iTunes, would you mind writing an honest review of the program? We'd really appreciate that. Your review helps us in the ranking of iTunes and makes the program easier for others to find us. We also have books and groups and all kinds of things. You can find more information out about Fresh Hope Ministry at www.freshhope.us. Be sure to tell your friends about the program, will you? And until the next time, may the Lord fill you with His hope, fresh, new, and daily. I'm Brad Hoefs, and this has been another edition of Fresh Hope for Mental Health. You've been listening to Fresh Hope for Mental Health. For more information, go to www.freshhope.us.